Tov, my friends. Today's daf yomi is Bava Kamma Mem Zayin, Bava Kamma 47. Today's daf yomi should be dedicated for a Shmira, for Am Yisrael, protection, the Geula, Yeshua, for the Chayalim, and for the Shvuyim, for the hostages. So today's daf yomi, we're going to start on Bava Kamma 46b, 3 lines from the bottom. Gemara had stated that if there's the Mishnah, the case of the Mishnah was if an ox that gored and you find the fetus if a cow that gored and you find the fetus next to the cow, we don't know if the fetus was part of the ox when it did the goring. So the cow pays half damages and the fetus pays a quarter damages. Gemara says, but then you end up paying 3/4 damages and your time is limited to a half. So Abaye's explanation is that we're talking about two separate owners. One person owns the cow and the other one owns the fetus. And so really the owner of the cow is paying half of a half, which is a quarter, and the owner of the fetus is paying half of a half of a half, which is an eighth. Rava says, 3 lines in the bottom of 46b, I don't like that explanation. Amar Rava, atu echa me'arba benezek echa mishmona benezek katani? Is that what our Mishnah said? Did our Mishnah say, when we're talking about a case of one where he pays 1/4 or 1/8? That's not what the Mishnah said. Chatzi nezek, v'revia nezek katani. The Mishnah said, that you pay half damages and quarter damages. So Abaye's explanation doesn't work with the language of the Mishnah. So therefore, for this reason, Rava comes along and gives a different answer. Rava says here what we're talking about is a case where the cow and the fetus are both owned by the same person. So why does it say you pay half damages from the cow and quarter damages from the fetus? It means if the cow is still there, then you're going to end up paying half damages from the cow, because you could collect migufo from the from the animal itself. You collect the half damages. But let's say the animal is not there. But let's say the cow is not there. We're on top of 47a. Then you look at the fetus, and you see the fetus there. Mishtan ruvia nezek mivlad. Then you look at the fetus, and you collect quarter damages from the fetus. Why? Because you get to collect half damages from the animal. But we're not sure if this fetus was part of the animal. And so therefore, if it would be part of the animal, you would pay half. But this is money in dispute. So therefore, Simcha says you split it in half. So the Gemara says, so what's the reason? Time of the Dinan, you have Evlad Bahadaki Nakha. The reason why you can only collect quarter damages from the fetus is because we're not certain if the fetus was part of the cow when it did its goring. And if it was clear to us that the fetus was part of the cow when the cow gored the ox, then you would for sure pay all the half damages. You could collect it straight from the fetus itself, because that's the cow. And therefore we're saying the assumption of our Mishnah according to Rava, is that the ubar, that the fetus is yerach imo, is considered to be like a limb of the animal. That's the assumption of the Gemara according to Rava. The fetus is considered to be like a limb of the animal. Rava latamei the Amar Rava, and Rava follows his logic because Rava is of the position para sheizika gova mifwada, that if there's a cow that does damage, you collect from the fetus of the cow, because the fetus is part of the cow itself. My taima gufahi. And therefore you want to calculate the half damages. You can only use the animal, and there's a cap on the value of the animal, but the fetus is part of that animal, so it's included in the cap. But the Tarnagoa Shezika, let's say it's a chicken or a hen that did damage, Eno Gova mi Beitzasa, then you cannot collect from the egg itself. My time up Almahu, because the egg is not considered to be part of the animal, it's considered to be separate. It's like the waste product of the animal. And so therefore, we're going to say under those circumstances, when you pay the half damages from the value of the hen, you wouldn't be able to include the egg in it. V'amarava, once we're going down this path. Let's say you had a pregnant cow. This goes back to the first clause. An ox scores the pregnant cow, and he does damages, but we don't calculate the value of the cow by itself and the fetus by itself, which would be a higher valuation, a higher level of damages. We view it as though the cow is pregnant. Because if you're not going to say this, you're damaging the damager because he's going to end up paying a higher fee. So too in a case where somebody chops off the hand of a slave, really the hand of anybody, but it's talking a real an example. Let's say you chop off the hand of his friend's slave. There, what we're saying is you don't look at it, as Rashi explains, we don't look at it as to how much you would pay to allow somebody to chop off your hand, but rather we look at it, what's your value with a hand versus without a hand, which is much lower damages than if you'd say, how much money would you be willing to accept to have your hand chopped off? So too we find where somebody damages his friend's field. We don't look at it as though, how much would you pay to allow somebody to eat all of these strawberries from your field, or let's say a row of strawberries, but rather we look at the whole value of the field with the strawberries or without those strawberries, which is less than the amount of money you would charge for just those strawberries. So well, why are we saying that we're doing this in order so we don't hurt the mazik, hurt the damager? If it's the law, liklosh mazik. Why not hurt the mazik? Make him pay it. So the Gemara says no, because he could say, Mishum da'amrei, he could say, Parma barta ziktach, Parma barta shaminoch. He says, I damaged your pregnant cow. That's what I should have to pay. I didn't damage a fetus, I damaged your pregnant cow. Gemara says, Pshita para dechad uvla dechad pitmo abal para. So let's say we're talking about a case where the cow is owned by one person and the fetus, the rights to the fetus are owned by another person. And when the cow is pregnant with a fetus, the cow gets a bigger belly. So that belly does not go to the owner of the fetus if there were damages to the belly, but that owner goes to the owner of the cow itself. But if there is nafcha is like the expanse, that when a cow is pregnant, it doesn't just get a bigger belly, but all its limbs get bigger, the hide gets bigger, the skin gets bigger, everything is expanded. Where do those damages go? Papa says Papa says it goes exclusively to the owner of the cow, whereas Rav Ika says Cholkin. No, that the owner of the cow splits with the owner of the fetus. And the Talmud says we rule that is split between the owner of the cow and indeed the owner of the fetus. So now we go to the Mishnah. Hakader shehichnis. Let's say you have a guy who has pots, pot maker. He's a potter. Shehichnis kiderosa v'chatzar balabayis. He brings his pots into the courtyard of somebody else. So Reuven is a potter, and he brings his pots into Shimon's courtyard, shelo b'reshus, without permission. Even though we would read this most likely as saying, we would have read this naturally, probably saying, oh, I didn't have permission to go in, and he brought it in. Reuven didn't have permission. But the commentaries say, no, he explicitly did not have permission. He said, you have no permission to bring your pots into my courtyard. Vishibra be'emaso shabalabayis. So Reuven explicitly has no permission to bring his pots into Shimon's courtyard, and Shimon's ox steps on Reuven's pots. Then we're going to say potter. Then Shimon is exempt. Reuven had no permission to bring it in. But let's say not only that, if Shimon's ox steps on the pots and breaks its leg, then it's Reuven's fault because he had no permission. But let's say he had permission to go in, then the Baal Chotzer will be chayav, then the Baal Chotzer will be liable because he said you have permission to come in. And so the Gemara is going to discuss why is Shimon liable under those circumstances. Hilchnis Peirosa v'Chotzer Balabayas Shelo Bershus. The Mishnah is going to basically give the same case in two other cases, similar cases, which Tosfos says is not only this, but also in this case. Not only in a case of pots, but let's say it was a case of fruits. Meaning, if we had just said the case of the pots, Tosfos says because pots are more likely to break, and so therefore we would say that he assumed that he accepted upon himself to watch them by giving them permission. But fruits, no. And if it just says a case of fruits, but not an animal. But anyway, we'll say the case here. So let's say he brought his fruits into the courtyard of the Balabayas. So Reuven brings his fruits into Shimon's courtyard. Shelo Bershus without permission, and when he brings them in, Shimon's animal eats them. Then we're going to say, Pater, Shimon is going to be exempt. And if Shimon's animal slips on them, Reuven is responsible. And let's say he goes in with permission, the owner of the courtyard is liable. So if he brings them in with permission, the owner of the courtyard is going to be liable. And now we have the third case, which is Hichnis Shoro Shelo Bershus. Let's say he brings his ox, Reuven brings his ox into Shimon's courtyard without permission. Top of Mem Zayin Amabades, Vinakho Shoro Shal Balabayas. And then what happens is the ox of the Balabayas gores him, meaning to say, Reuven brings his ox in without permission of Shimon, and Shimon's ox scores Reuven. Or the dog of Shimon bites, or the dog of Shimon bites him. Then we're going to say he's pater, he's going to be exempt. Why does the Tana all of a sudden change from an ox to a dog? It doesn't use that in any of the other examples. So perhaps the reason is, so one of the theories suggested by the Melech HaShlomo is because we saw earlier that you're not allowed to raise a dangerous dog in your household. So it's possible that the reason here is because maybe he wasn't supposed to have this dog in his household in the first place. And so even though he had it, he still had this dangerous dog, he's going to be exempt. Let's say Nagahu Shoro Shabalabayas. Chayev. Let's say Reuven's ox scores Shimon's ox there. Reuven brought his ox in without permission. He's responsible. But let's say Nafa Laboro Vehivish Memav. Let's say Reuven's ox falls into the pit in Shimon's yard and thereby ruins the water. And then we're going to say Chayev, he's responsible. And if Shimon's father or son were inside the pit and the ox fell on them and killed him, then Reuven would have to pay the ransom. But let's say he had specific permission to come in, then Baal Chotzer would be chayav. Then the owner of the ox would be liable in this case. Because whoever gives permission to his friend's ox to come to the courtyard, we're going to say as a baseline, he accepts upon himself to watch it. And it's as though he's saying, I will watch your animal. And so therefore, if he didn't watch it, he's liable. Whereas Rebbe says, in all these cases, even though he gives him permission to come in, he's not going to be responsible unless he explicitly says, I will watch it. So if he comes in all these cases, he's not going to be responsible unless he gives him permission unless he specifically says, I will watch it. So the Gemara first points out that there's a contradiction between the first clause of the Mishnah and the last clause. That according to the first clause, that what's the reason why Shimon is not responsible for his ox damaging Reuven's pots when Reuven brings them in without permission because time of the soul bereshus, because he brought them in without permission. Bereshus, but if he brought them in with permission, lo mechayev bal kederos b'niskei be'emaso de bal chotzer, and then Shimon's ox gets hurt on Reuven's pots. If Reuven had permission to go in, then Reuven would not be responsible for the damages done to the animal. V'lo amrinon kibue kabil bal kederos nitiraso de behemaso de bal chotzer, and we don't say that Reuven, by being allowed to go in, accepted upon himself to protect the owner of the courtyard's animal from being hurt by his pots. And this is the position of Rebbe. This is money Rebbe hidamar kol b'stamel kibo anitirasa. That's the position of Rebbe, who says as a baseline, just because you have permission to be there doesn't mean you accepted the responsibility to guard it. But Amos Seifa, but the next clause, the last clause says, Im hechnes bereshus, that if you go in with permission, Baal Chatzar Chayev, it says that if you have permission to go into the courtyard, and then your animal falls into the pit, the owner of the courtyard is responsible. That follows the position on the Rabbanan, the Amri Bistama, Nami Kibui Kabil Niturasa. That as a baseline, the owner of the courtyard has accepted upon himself responsibility to guard your animal. So therefore, the first clause saying that as a baseline, you haven't accepted upon yourself responsibility to guard something. The next clause says, as a baseline, the owner of the courtyard has accepted upon himself to guard it. And then in the final clause, V'su Rebbe Omer B'kulan Eino Chayev Ad Shekabo Aval B'Hayis L'Shmor. In all these cases, you're not responsible until you explicitly accept upon yourself responsibility to guard it. So does it really make sense to say that the Reisha and the Seifa, the first clause and the last clause is Rebbe, Umitziyasa Rabbanan, and the first clause and the last clause is Rebbe, that as a baseline you don't accept upon yourself the responsibility to guard it, even though you have permission to be there. And the middle clause is the Rabbanan, who say as a baseline, if you have permission to be there, the one who grants you the permission, you're accepting upon yourself responsibility to guard it. The Gemara says, "Reish of a Sefer Rabbanim, it's Yasser Rabbanim." Is that the case? And indeed, Rabbi Zera's conclusion is that's the case. Tabra, break the Mishnah. Misha Shanazu O Shanazu. Yeah, that two different clauses. The first clause is Rebbe, and the second clause is Rabbanan, and the third clause back to Rebbe. Rava says no, Kula Rabbanani. No, the first clause and the second clause is the Rabbanan. We have a problem. In the first place, we're saying that if the person has permission to go into the courtyard, he's not responsible for if the animal gets hurt by his pots. Whereas in the second case, we're saying that if the owner grants permission to come into the courtyard and the animal falls into the pit, he is responsible for the damage of the animal who fell into the pit. So Rava says, Kul Rabbanani, Ubereshus, Shmiras Kederus Kibo of Baal Chotzer. So Rava says the whole position is the Rabbanan. But what does it mean when the owner grants you permission to come in? We're saying Shmiros Kederos Kibo of Baal Chatzar. That in this case, the owner of the courtyard, when he gives permission to the potter to come in the first case, he's accepting upon himself, the owner of the courtyard has accepted upon himself that he's going to watch the pits, the pots, even if they break from the wind. And so therefore, even if there's negligence. And so therefore, the Baal Kederos, that's what it means with permission. It means that the owner is saying, you have permission to come in, but it doesn't mean in that case that the owner of the pots is agreeing to protect the pots. So it's not the case that it's not the same scenario that when Rebbe says, in the third case, that you only assume responsibility when you're explicit, because in this first case, we're not talking about the pot's owner. We're talking about the owner of the courtyard is saying, you have permission to come in and I'm accepting responsibility, then I'm not going to damage your pots. The owner of the pots never accepted responsibility not to damage the animal. So now we say in the next case that if he brings his fruits into the courtyard of the balabayas without permission, and the owner of the animal gets damaged by it, then the owner of the fruits is responsible. So it says Rav, when do we say that the owner of the fruits who brought them into the courtyard without permission is responsible? Only where he slipped on them, where the animal slipped on them. But if the animal ate them, and as a result of this, if the owner of the courtyard's animal ate these fruits and got hurt as a result of that, potter, we're going to say that the owner of the fruits is exempt. My timer. He could have said to him, it's your fault, you ate them. It's your fault, your animal ate them. Let's think about this, lots of times, maybe this is like the case, somebody gives a dangerous drug to somebody, we'll see this in the Gemara. Who's responsible? The person who gives the drug or the person who eats it? Here he's saying to the owner of the animal, you should intervene in it. I don't have to pay for your animal eating something it wasn't supposed to. Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says when he heard this position of Rav, he says, Amina, I said, Kinayim v'shachev Rav Amar la'ashmaita. No. Rav must have said this while he was sleeping. There's no way Rav could have said this while he was awake. Rav must have said this while he was sleeping. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, noticing sama maves lefnei behemas chavero. If somebody puts poison, we learned in the Brisa, meaning to say, Rav is saying that you're not responsible if the animal eats something that it shouldn't have eaten. You're not responsible if you brought it in. Even though you brought it into the area, you're not responsible. So Rav Sheshet said, Rav must have said this while he was sleeping, because we learned in the Brisa, if somebody puts poison in front of the animal of his friend, he put the rat poison in front of your friend's dog, so to speak. You're exempt from the laws of man, but you're liable from the laws of heaven, because you didn't actually give it to the animal, and the animal should have known not to eat it. Sama maves, what's the reason why you're exempt from the laws of man? Because only by poison, because that's something that the animal typically doesn't eat. But, says Rav Sheshes, if it would be actual food that the animal eats, adam nami mechayev, that implies, according to the Brisa, that he would be responsible even by the laws of man. But according to you, why would he be responsible? The person could argue, no, your animal should not have eaten it. And so we see from here that this is a question against Rav's ruling. So Rav says, no. Amri hu adin, that Brisa would say, afilu peros nami pater midine adam. No, if it would be fruits, and you put the fruits and the animal died as a result of this, you would also be exempt from the laws of man. What's this Brisa is teaching us is that few sama maves nami, that even if he put poison in front of the animal and the animal ate it and died, you're also exempt from the laws of man. But the chiddush is not that you're also exempt from the laws of man, but rather, because you shouldn't have eaten it, but chayav b'dinei shemaim. But you're also going to be responsible for the laws of heaven. That's the point, that even though it's something that the animal didn't eat, you're still morally wrong. You still have violated the laws of heaven. Or alternatively, Ibayis Eima, the chiddush is sama maves nami bafar zata, the hainu peri. No, the poison was in this case put in the way it looked like food, and so therefore that's why we're going to say you're liable from the laws. You're liable from the laws of heaven, because the animal should have known not that you're not liable from the laws of man, because the animal should have known not to eat it. That's how Rav would defend himself. Meisvei, the Gemara challenges Rav's position. He says that you're not liable from the laws of man if the other person's animal ate something and hurt itself, because you could say your animal shouldn't have eaten it. We have a brisa which says, let's say a woman comes in to somebody else's courtyard to grind her wheat. She comes in without permission, which she brings her wheat in. And the owner of the courtyard's animal eats her wheat. Potter. She's going to be exempt. Excuse me. Then we're going to say under those circumstances that the owner of the courtyard is exempt for the damages that occurred to this woman that his animal ate her wheat because she had no permission to go in there. But in Huska, but if that animal got damaged by eating the wheat, chayeves, then the woman is responsible. But why? Isn't this a question on Rav? Neima hava. Why can't she say, your animal should not have eaten my wheat? It's a direct contradiction to Rav. The Gemara says, no. Amri umiadifa mimas nisin. No. Why do you assume that this case of the Bryce is any different than our Mishnah? Do kimna shehuchukubayan. Now, why are we saying it's responsible? Let's say it's the same case of our Mishnah, that the animal slipped on them. It's not a case where the animal ate it, it's an animal slipped on it. Where it says, yeah, that's a very good point. The one who asked this question, what was he thinking? Amracha, he was saying, Bishlama masnisin, because the language of our Mishnah is different. Katani imhuska bahen. In our Mishnah, it says if the animal got damaged from them, which implies shehuchaku bahenhu, implies it slipped on it. Avohachai katani, but in this case, it states imhuska, if the animal got hurt, below katani bahen. And it doesn't say on them, so that implies achiluhu de katani. It implies that maybe it got hurt through the eating of it. The idach, whereas the alternative position is amracha lochna. No, there's no distinction if it says huska behen or huska. Both cases, it's referring to where the animal got hurt by slipping on it. So again, we're going to try and disprove Rav's position that if the owner of the courtyard's animal ate your food, then you're not responsible because your animal shouldn't have eaten it. Let's say you bring your ox into somebody else's courtyard without permission, and the owner of the courtyard's animal ate your wheat. So no, this case is that you bring your ox into the courtyard without permission, and your ox eats the wheat of the owner, the hetris, and the owner of the ox's animal gets sick, and as a result of this, umes, and it dies. Potter, the owner of the courtyard, is exempt because the Reuven's ox had no permission to be in Shimon's courtyard. But if he had permission to go in there, then the Baal Chatzar is chayiv. Then the owner of the courtyard is liable. But why? The owner of the courtyard should have said, you should have told your animal not to eat from my wheat. Why is the owner of the courtyard responsible? So the Gemara says, Amarava Bershus Hashalo Bershus Karamis. You're asking me a question from somebody who has permission to go in to somebody who enters in without permission. There's a huge distinction that only when he brings the fruits in without permission does Rav say he's exempt. Why? Because the person who brought them in did not accept upon himself to guard his animal. And so therefore, the other person should not have eaten it. But when he enters in with permission, Bereshus, when he enters in with permission of the courtyard, Shmiro Shoro Kibo Olav, then the owner of the courtyard accepted upon himself responsibility to guard the ox of the one who brought it in. Then even if he choked himself, the owner of the courtyard would be responsible. So therefore, in that case, he's going to be responsible. Okay, that's today's daf, a beautiful daf. And so therefore, we'll stop the recording here.